Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Ground news.
Hey guys. Let's learn. That's what we do here. My name's Connor if you're new. Well, sometimes we do that. Let's be real. Original, all the things, top of the description. That's good enough, right? Not restarting. Yeah, Serbia, it seems like ever since World War I, I guess, have just, Russia definitely came to their defense there. I'm not sure about the historical relationship between Russia and Serbia prior to World War I. I don't really know. Maybe Crimean War stuff, 60 years earlier. I don't know. But clearly they have a stronger connection with Russia than other Balkan or Eastern European countries, other than Belarus or whatnot. So let's maybe it'll teach us a bit about that. Why Serbia can't decide between East and West.
This video was brought to you by Ground News. Public discontent in Serbia has arguably reached a new high since the Milosevic era, with reoccurring protests against incumbent President Aleksandar Vucic's perceived corruption and autocratic tendencies. In response, in May, Vucic stepped down as leader of the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, or SNS, while remaining in post as president. However, with general elections less than 2 weeks away, it's far from over for Vucic. Having spent more than 30 years in politics, Vucic has perfected a balancing act between East and West, which has enabled him to carefully craft an image of a well-respected statesman among world leaders.
Jesus, how tall is he? How tall is Putin? Like 5'8"?
An image of a well-respected statesman among world leaders, particularly in China and Russia, thus maintaining his strongman status. So in this video, we'll explore Vucic's geopolitical juggling and how he manages to engage with Eastern powers while remaining a strong candidate for EU membership.
Okay.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. To better understand Serbia's current foreign policy, we need to examine Serbia's politics in the post-Milosevic era, as well as Vucic's own political history. And that's because Vucic has switched political alliances many times in the past. He started his 30-year political career as the Minister of Information in the ultra-nationalist Serbian Radical Party, led by politician and convicted war criminal Vojislav Šešelj in 1993. 15 years later, after two wars, a NATO bombing campaign, the overthrow of Milosevic, and Kosovo's independence, a new pro-European agenda emerged. This shift was led by the dominant Democrat Party, and EU accession quickly became a hot topic in Serbian politics. And in this new political environment, Vucic's predecessor announced in 2009 that Serbia's foreign policy would be based on maintaining good relations with four key entities: the EU, United States, China, and Russia. Also during this time, Vucic himself moved from the Radical Nationalist Party to the newly reformed pro-European Serbian Progressive Party.
I actually wasn't sure whether or not they were in the EU. If you asked me right before now and I saw the map, they're not. I probably would have thought about it for a little bit, but I'm not sure what I would have said. And clearly, a few other Balkan nations don't seem to be. Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina. What else? Hungary is. Montenegro? North Macedonia.
Also during this time, Vucic himself moved from the Radical Nationalist Party to the newly reformed pro-European Serbian Progressive Party, or SNS, which splintered from the Serbian Radical Party over disagreements regarding EU integration. So what are the SNS's foreign policies and attitude towards the EU? Well, unlike many other Eastern European populist parties, the SNS is formally pro-European Union. However, as the EU integration process has stalled, the SNS has increasingly foregrounded non-European actors in Serbia's political landscape, praising Russia and China as reliable partners.
What?
has increasingly foregrounded non-European actors in Serbia's political landscape, praising Russia and China as reliable partners. On paper, Vučić hasn't given up on European integration and has perfected his predecessor's foreign policy ambivalence, maintaining good relations with Russia and China while simultaneously insisting that he still wants to join the EU eventually. But as negotiations between the EU and Balkan candidate countries have faltered over the years, the region has seen increased strategic competition from countries like Russia and China. And Vučić has proven remarkably adept at playing off these geopolitical rivalries. In essence, Vučić has maintained cordial relations with what you might euphemistically describe as the West, specifically the EU and US, and also the East, countries like Russia and China. And this delicate balancing act has helped Vučić advance both his domestic and foreign policy interests. When it comes to the West, domestically, Vučić's tentative support for EU accession reflects the view of many Serbs, who are in favor of accession in principle, but increasingly apathetic as accession negotiations continually stall. Steady relations with the EU are also in Serbia's economic interests, given that the EU is, by a long stretch, Belgrade's largest trading and investment partner. In terms of
something I want to say quick, and if you think I'm wrong, I would love to, please, anything I say you think is incorrect, I would love to hear your response or any comments. But it doesn't seem like a very bad place to be in. Just kind of on the edge. You're not clearly either, with the West or with Russia and China. And so having two extremely powerful sides that don't like each other, seeing you as a possible realistic, stronger ally in the future, then, that's more geopolitical power that you can yield. I don't know how powerful Serbia is. Are they seen as kind of the most powerful country in the Balkans? I don't know if you consider Romania, Bulgaria, Greece even to be in the Balkans. I think it's more maybe, Cyprus. But I don't know how strong Serbia is regardless of being in that position. And if any of you know, I would like to know.
In terms of foreign policy, Vučić has successfully reinvented himself by shedding his nationalist past and now portrays himself as a pro-European reformer who aims to resolve long-standing regional issues. In 2013, for example, Vučić signed the Brussels Agreement, which agrees on the integration of Serb-majority municipalities in North Kosovo into the Kosovar legal system. And many Western politicians are apparently convinced and provide tacit support for Vučić, or at least refrain from explicit criticism, because they think that they need to keep Vučić on side to guarantee regional stability, even though he regularly stokes regional tensions and there's been no substantial progress on the Kosovo issue in the last decade.
Again, I think that could be, if it's intentional, it might not be a bad idea, just to not look completely in bed now with the European Union, and so Russia can still kind of see a glimmer of hope. Anyways,
but the West is also concerned that Serbia's strong ties with Russia could disrupt regional security, which contributes towards Western leaders' lenient stance towards Belgrade. This is why, despite Vučić's controversial politics, the EU has been reluctant to cut ties with Belgrade. And it's notable the EU refused to sanction Serbia after the September attacks in northern Kosovo, despite provisional plans to do so. When it comes to the East, though, and more specifically...
I know I'm pausing a lot and talking maybe too much. You just fast forward if you want, or click on the original. But one of the more fascinating things I'm learning about world politics is how countries are able to get away with things not on a truly just fair basis. It depends on how much power you have, what you have to, like in Serbia's case, seeing you as a possible ally and not a lost cause to Russia. In that, rules only apply when you're a more insignificant, less powerful nation without much downside for countries calling you out. And it's kind of frustrating, but at the same time, it makes sense. But world politics just isn't fair. You know, it's not fair. It's dependent on how powerful you are and the things I just said. So,
despite provisional
let me know
plans
if you
to
disagree.
do so. When it comes to the East, though, and more specifically Russia, Vucic's ties to Putin appeal to Serbs with pro-Russian sentiment and protect him from nationalist opposition. This has also allowed Serbia to maintain access to cheap Russian gas. While Vucic did condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine at the UN in September of this year, he did refrain from supporting EU sanctions against Russia. In justifying his decision, Vucic alluded to historical grievances when Serbia was under sanctions. But at least as important was the fact that Serbia is still heavily dependent on Russian gas, having renewed a 10-year gas contract with Russia's Gazprom in 2022. Energy is another area where Vucic has engaged in a delicate balancing act. While Serbia still imports Russian gas, the government has sought to diversify its energy imports with help from Montenegro and Azerbaijan.
Again, I think that was just a really good move by Serbia. Don't, condemn the attack on Ukraine, but don't join in on the sanctions. So it's like you still show both sides. Like, hey, why'd you do this? Well, I did this. Do you want me to go to the other side? And you can say that to either Russia or the European Union, or Russia or NATO, China and Russia or NATO. So I have really no emotions when it comes to geopolitics, because, some countries are in much more easy positions to condemn things and do as they should. And so this isn't something I hold against Serbia, even the Serbian government, obviously not the Serbian people. But to me, it seems like exactly how I would react if I was in Serbia's position. So although it's like, oh, wow, you're not, joining in on sanctions and stuff with Ukraine. Well, you don't know the position they're in. And it seems sort of reasonable to me so far. It's easy for me in the U.S. to be like, okay, like, we don't like Russia, condemn the attack, aid Ukraine, but they're in a whole different position. So it's, I don't have like an anger response to how countries act. I just, I feel like it gets in the way of understanding them.
Which has been perceived by the EU as Serbia playing its part to end Russia's energy dominance and protected Serbia from more Western criticism. Serbia has also been deepening its trade ties with China, as shown when Serbia was the first to approve China's COVID-19 vaccine. China is also a preferred partner for Vucic, since it doesn't interfere with local governance in exchange for its interests, unlike the EU, which insists on rule of law, allowing Vucic to maintain power and media control. As long as Chinese interests are protected, Beijing's policy of non-interventionism will not raise the question of the quality of local state administration or political structures. So, over the last decade, Vucic has welcomed a heavy Chinese economic presence, with at least 61 projects worth 18.7 billion euros coming from Chinese entities in 2021. Then, in October of this year, Vucic and Xi Jinping signed a free trade deal at the Belt and Road Forum, with Vucic emphasizing Serbia's need to survive and consider its future before Serbia becomes an EU member. China has also invested in the Belgrade-Budapest high-speed railway, a key European project within the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, as well as maximizing foreign investment, maintaining commercial relations with Russia and China allows Vucic to construe his balancing act as a sort of Serbia-first policy that pursues Serbian interests wherever they're best served. So, you get the idea. For the last decade or so, Vucic has pursued a delicate balancing act between East and West, which has worked remarkably well for him. This tightrope routine, a central pillar of Vucic's rule, creates the impression of constant change and progression, and explains Western powers' constant tolerance of Vucic's controversial politics. But this balancing act is seen by opposition powers in Serbia not as balancing, but buying time. Serbia's foreign policy is likely to maintain this ambiguity for as long as the Kosovo dispute is not resolved. And there's no serious indication from the EU about taking Serbia on board as a member so long as Vucic is in power. So the country may need to continue walking this tightrope for a while longer. On the topic of EU unity, recent statements from NATO leader Jens Stoltenberg have been reported widely. Now, 21% of this reporting is coming from the left, while 51% is coming from the right. And if you compare the headlines, you'll see some interesting framing emerging here. And this is all possible thanks to our sponsor, Ground News.
Guys, I'm going to go through the ad at the end of the video, but just before I forget, before you guys go or whatnot, I knew nothing about this guy, okay? Really nothing. I still know really nothing. It's just from what I've seen this video, he seems to be playing his cards pretty well. And again, my view of world politics is not, there's no anger or, there's really no anger or happiness in the way I'm viewing it as the more I learn, in that, like, China getting its way and going around the USA and trying to start the Belt and Road Initiative to switch global power and trade reliance on the USA. Yeah, from an American point of view, I see that as bad for us. But from a Chinese point of view, I see that as completely reasonable. You don't want to be under another country's powerful ability for sanctions and whatnot. And so, yeah, saying that I don't like China, it's not that I don't like China, it's just that they are an adversary to the country I live in. And so I don't think you have to be pro-Serbia or anti-Serbia to recognize that in this video, he seems to be playing his cards pretty well. So I'd appreciate any comments, any answers to any of the questions I had, and let's watch this
website and
here.
App developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. That's because every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. For example, for the story we mentioned earlier, you can see the bias distribution of every outlet reporting on it.
I love this.
The complete factuality information and the ownership data. And with their new bias insights feature.
It's sad that something like this is needed, but it is needed in my opinion. I do think, not that news stations lie, but that it seems like they're trying to prove an agenda by picking out stories that back up that agenda. And I just don't think that's how news should work. It shouldn't just be a sports team business sort of.
You can even get a breakdown of the specific differences between left and right reporting. And I especially like their My News Bias feature, which allows you to track your reading habits over time. You can view your own personal biases from specific news outlets and political lean to specific topics and locality. I can even see who owns the majority of news that I consume. Now, I know that I personally benefited enormously from Ground News, and as a result, I've gotten much better at spotting political bias, and I've surprisingly challenged some of my own views. So I highly encourage all of our viewers to give Ground News a try. In fact, we're offering 30% off their Vantage plan to all viewers. This includes unlimited access to every feature, including to My News Bias. That offer is only available here too, so make sure that you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started for under $6 a month.
I had something I was going to say, and now I'm upset because I didn't say it, and I forget it. It was about the news thing. It wasn't about the Serbia thing. But if you're still here, you lasted this long. I hope you're doing well. Love y'all, and I'll see you next video. Bye, guys.